So diving into it, first off, congrats on your directorial debut, Randall.
Oh, thank
Pretty
you.
exciting to also see this come to life. Some of our readers might know that, this is adapted from the original graphic novel that came out 15 years ago. So it's
Yeah.
been a while, and this film, you've been working on this for a long time. And I've heard you talk in other interviews about how when you first read it, it really resonated with you. And
hmm
I'm curious to know, even after 15 years, what about the story do you think makes it still so relevant to our Asian American community today?
Mm. I think it's relevant to our community, but also I think just people in general, in the sense that ultimately it's a story about change, and dealing with change,
Mm.
and whether whether or not we have the ability to change, as the world around us kind of moves forward. How much do we want to hold on to who we are, and how much we want to hold on to our past? And I think, those are very kind of universal questions, and I feel like that's the ultimately the what the story is about,
Mm.
in terms of not just Ben, but I think all the main characters in it. They're all undergoing some they're all at a crossroads to some degree, and I think Ben we find someone who's probably the most resistant to growth and change, and he's kind of confronted with this big question.
I will say it's very interesting because each of the characters kind of faces challenges of their own, and we kind of see each of those stories develop throughout the film, which is great.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of the things that excited me most about the book when I read it in 2007 was, each of these, and I saw a bit of myself in each of these characters, and I could really identify with them, particularly their flaws, and it kind of forced me into kind of a very, I don't know, it forced me to reflect on myself. And I love that. I just love that because rarely, especially at the time in 2007, did I get to see characters that were so close to my own life, my real life, but also characters who were so complicated and flawed.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And that's a great segue because I wanted to hear Justin's perspective as well. Like this is not your first time playing a character named Ben. Like on Umbrella Academy, you're Ben as well, but that is a totally different, like superhero, tentacle, the kind of character. And this Ben is much more flawed, as we're talking about. Pessimistic sometimes, could be cynical and selfish. And the audience might find the character at times unlikable. So how did you kind of go about embodying this mental state of being this kind of character who is both relatable, but at times, really struggling, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, Randall and I have had the chance to talk about this movie for a bit now, and a lot of people describe him as unlikable or insufferable, and I understand why, but I don't know. When I first read the character, I was like, I get this guy. He reminds me so much of parts of myself. He reminds me so much of people around me, and that is to say, I think we're all a bit of Ben, and we're all a bit of assholes at times. So the people who respond that negatively, I'm like, well, let's take a deeper look inside first. But so for me, it was never like, I never found it like an insane challenge, because in many ways he's so relatable. I mean, he's just a guy who's unfortunately not very well versed in communicating the things that he wants to say and communicating his opinions. I think a lot of the things that Ben has to say are valid and have nuggets of truth in them. It's just sort of the execution that I think is lost a lot of the
Mm.
time. And so for me, it was really about leaning into um, those parts of myself that I knew exist there, which are these parts that are often insecure or cynical or critical, and really bringing those things to the surface, um, and and again, with Randall's direction and those words and the incredible cast, you know, everything sort of just became alive in those moments on set.
Going back to the unlikability, or
Mhm.
Ben is toxic, or I mean, there are characters in these movies who are running around shooting people, and and being terrible to women, and just like we're just so used to that we don't describe those hero, quote unquote, heroes as being toxic or unlikable, like
Mhm.
you just killed a guy, uh, but
It's true.
here we have a very, I mean, and it's a credit to Justin, I mean, it's a very very real and raw portrayal of a human being, and I think that sometimes hits people in deeper ways because again, it becomes a lot more identifiable. You're kind of forced not to take them in from a distance. You really have to get into the character to be on that journey.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you said about you can imagine yourself in these characters or people that you know in your everyday life. And I think that's why you can maybe identify someone as, oh, that person seems toxic because I've interacted with someone
Yeah,
who's like that, right? It is a lot more closer to home.
yeah, for sure.
I also wanted to ask about any ways that you changed the adaptation from the paper to the screen. Any things that you strayed away from maybe a little bit just to fit the medium more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a lot. I mean, that was probably one, initially when we were in development of the script, that was one of our main goals, was how do we make sure this is a movie, and not just a strict replication of the book onto screen. We wanted to have it stand on its own. I mean, we wanted fans of the book to definitely enjoy the movie, but we also wanted it to like, if you weren't familiar with the book, you'd be into this, and I think a lot of the work was uh, done with that in mind, and development, and also modernizing because the book was written in 2007, and there was just so many things that were different in 2007, which is crazy because it doesn't feel that long ago to me. But like in the book, there's just so many slamming down a telephone, and like we just don't do that anymore, just like little things like that, the use of social media, the and also just some attitudes on things, have changed in our culture, and just kind of subtly addressing those changes in the rewrite. But I will say a lot of the the heart of the original book, it still applies to today, and so in a lot of ways the movie is pretty faithful to the book.
And Justin, did you have any notes, after reading the graphic novel and also reading the script, any notes on things that you might have changed with the character or the way that the character interacted with others?
Randall and I had many conversations before filming, and we just wanted to bring as much truth and humanity to each of these characters. And we didn't want any of the characters to feel like heroes or villains, and that
Yeah.
they would all exist in this gray space, which I think is life. It's we all contain multitudes, we all contain contradictions, and Ben is a perfect example of a walking, breathing contradiction. I mean, you're rooting for him one moment, and then you're like, why did you say that the next? And it's all of these things. And so just such a joy to sort of dive into that work. When we were on set, we would try different things, we would experiment. If we felt like a line or a moment wasn't working for some reason, Randall was so collaborative, and we would change things, and hopefully make it all feel like these are real people having these real conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I think that slice of life kind of nature to this film is also something that really resonated with me as well. And so I used to live in Berkeley. I'm calling from the Bay Area right now, but I
Oh,
used to live in
wow.
Berkeley. I went to school there. So it was really cool, like seeing the bar and like recognizing the streets that I used to walk down. The story mostly takes place in both Berkeley and then New York, these two very different cities. And even the characters there, right, kind of the artsy, grungy side of Berkeley, and then you go to New York and you see more of the high class, sophisticated, people of New York. What was it like kind of shooting in these two very different locations, and how did these locations influence the storytelling?
Well, I think the locations are really important to the story, and in my mind, again, this movie is ultimately about change, and I kind of saw these two cities at different um, different points on that spectrum of change. I like Berkeley in a lot of ways represents Ben, because Ben, he's from Berkeley. He lives in Berkeley. He will never leave Berkeley. He hates New York. This is a city like Ben that's kind of holding on, kind of holding on to itself, and is fighting all the things that Ben hates about New York, whether, it be gentrification, all the gentrification, all the, just the speed of the place, and the energy of New York, and so for Ben to actually make that move from the Bay to New York, my hope is that it feels like a very significant decision, a very huge decision for him to do that. He must be in a real place of vulnerability for him to actually make that move to a city that just doesn't fit him, who he is. And so yeah, a lot of thought was put into the two cities, what they represent in the story, and in particular what they represent to Ben.
Any thoughts to add there, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my end, it was really sort of I don't know how pre-planned it was, but it was kind of crazy how the movie reflected our actual shooting schedule in life in many ways, because the last scene that we shot in New York was the last scene where Alice and Ben are kind of saying goodbye to each other at the bar, and so it really felt like kind of surreal to be saying goodbye to each other, because the next day we were gonna move over to Berkeley. And to get on that plane was like literally, like, for me as Justin and as Ben, like him going back to Berkeley, and kind of the last scene that we shot there was the last scene of the movie.
Yeah.
And so I was really able to look out on that view in the same way that Ben was looking out. It mirrored the real life experience of reflecting on my time on this movie, on Ben's journey, and seeing sort of the newness of the city for the first time.
Yeah, and none of that was planned. That was, with the restrictions of independent film, you just got to go with what's most convenient and cost effective. But I feel like in a lot of ways this movie was just charmed, because not only in how the scheduling laid out, but also in the actors that we got for the movie, like, because we were a low budget movie, we were mostly casting out of New York aside from the leads, and we had so many actors that we loved and wanted, but they, Sonoya lives in London, Tim Simons lives in LA. We can't cast them because we can't afford to fly them out, but then, they just happened to be in New York at the time. And that's just one of many examples of how this movie just felt kind of, I don't know, there was so much serendipity and magic to just the way things kind of unfolded for us. Yeah.
Like the universe telling you this movie has to be made.
Yeah. It's a way to look at it. Yeah.
One other topic I want to touch upon is, the movie opens kind of in a meta way. You have a movie inside of a movie. And this particular one is a rom-com referencing Crazy Rich Asians a bit. I see that. And the conversation, that Ben has with Miko after is really kind of reflecting a lot of the conversations and discourse that we saw in real life, people's response to Crazy Rich Asians, right? So I really liked how we kind of addressed that head on, and there's definitely gray areas. It's really not black and white kind of situation. I'm curious to know, in the 5 years since Crazy Rich Asians has come out, how do you think that AAPI representation in film has progressed, and where do we go from here? What else needs to be improved, or what needs to be made?
Gosh.
Big question, I know.
Yeah. I mean, I think just the fact that our movie got made is a testament to the change that's happening in the industry, you know. And I think a lot about Beef, and which Justin is in.
Yep.
And I think a lot about how special and unique that show is, and how impossible that show would have been to make, you know. I don't know, even I don't know, 5 years ago, you know. And and I see parallels with our movie, just in terms of, you know, these kind of complicated characters, and this absence of kind of typical tropes that you find in Asian American stories, you know. So I do think the fact that these projects are coming out is really exciting. But, you know, I almost hesitate to say like that things are amazing now and things are great, and, you know, we just all have to kind of keep chipping away, and telling stories that are different, you know, and stories that are just the stories we want to tell, whatever they be, you know, and not necessarily stories that always have to fit into any sort of box. To me, what's most exciting are the things that are really different.
Are there
Yeah.
any stories in your head right now that you can kind of let us in on that you would be interested in telling? Like general ideas, like what stories do you think haven't been told that need to be told?
I don't know, the Jenny Lee story, you know, the story of your life, which I'm sure is unique and detailed and has never been told on a big screen. You know, just anything specific to me is exciting. I don't have like any specific ideas at the moment that I can talk about, but
Yeah,
definitely like the things that are unique and specific and original are, to me, like the most interesting and fun. Yeah. And to work with this guy, just, I mean, like if anything I do, I just want to keep working with him because he's so amazing.
Any response to that, Justin? And response to the question as well.
I do not want to work with Randall ever.
Yeah, he's told me this numerous times.
No. Anything Randall wants to do, it's an immediate yes from me. You know, I guess my dream is to not have these conversations anymore, right? It's just kind of like Randall and I, we get asked all the time that question of like, what do you hope for representation? And it's an absolutely valid question, but I'm hoping that in a few years, there's just so much stuff out there that we're just talking about what's exciting and what's interesting, because the conversation revolving around representation is because there's still, we feel like, a lack. And I feel like when there, I hope in the near future, when there's just so much out there, that it's not revolving around what things are Asian or Asian American, and what things, it's just about what products are good. And if they happen to have Asian Americans in them, great. If not, there's other things that will resonate for other people. So, yeah.
Definitely. I hope I'll get to that point at some time. My last question will be, what would you say to the people who watch this movie and see themselves and they're afraid to confront their own shortcomings? What would you have to say to them?
I would say go to therapy. Invest in therapy. I feel like I had so many Ben tendencies prior to therapy, and through a lot of healing and cathartic sessions with my therapist, I've been able to really come out of some of those tendencies, which is very, very, useful. And surround yourself with a great group of people. I mean, people like Alice, I think are the people who really stick by you through thick and thin. And, I think Ben said it best, like, we're meeting Ben at a very particular time in his life, it was almost one of the most truthful things he said in the whole movie, when he says, you're meeting me at sort of one of the worst possible seasons of my life, and understanding that people go through those seasons and they become people that they might not want to be, and yet they have the opportunity to grow and change and evolve and, you know, experience new seasons of their life where hopefully they're much more evolved, self-actualized, emotionally mature, healthy people.
I did the commencement speech for UCLA recently, and I was telling those kids, like, let's try to be kinder people in general, but that can't really happen until you show kindness and care to yourself, and the idea of taking care of yourself and cultivating your joy and your sense of humor and your mental health. It's hard to be a good person when you're not being good to yourself, you know. And so I think things like therapy, and my hope with the movie is that, yeah, it will force self-reflection, like just like the book did for me in 2007, and that it'll inspire people to strive to be better to themselves. Yeah.
Great answers. Love that. And I really like how the film ends on such a hopeful note. It's not like, all right, Ben's a completely changed person, like everything's for the better, but you see these hints of his mind is starting to change about things. He's starting to be more open to other people. And yeah, it's just a great way to end.
Which I think is again very true to life. I mean, sometimes and again, not that I don't like these movies because they're very entertaining, but like we'll go from 0 to 180-degree difference within a span of 2 hours.
Yeah.
These characters, and that, I mean, I've yet to see that in real life.
I wish that were the case.
I wish that were the case.
Life would be easier. Yeah.
You know, it's just these small seedlings, you know, that continue to get planted and planted and planted. I think, you know, a few of those seedlings are getting planted in Ben, and you know, maybe in a few years they'll start to finally sprout and blossom and create some real change in them. But change is hard and it's gradual.
Yeah.
Well, I really enjoyed our conversation today and want to thank you again for taking the time to chat. Really insightful answers. But
thanks,
best
Penny.
of luck on the national rollout in August, and hope you all have a wonderful day.